Hi, I'm Jack Plunkett. Today we're going to talk about the outsourcing and offshoring industry. How do we define outsourcing? It's very simply a situation where a client company lets some other company provide it with services that the client would normally do for itself. A good example is a company like IBM Global Services or Hewlett-Packard coming in and literally taking over the computer department in a client company. In other words, the computer department in the client company would be fully staffed by IBM Global Services employees, IBM Global Services equipment. IBM would take over the entire computer operation and operate it to the standards and specifications required by the client company. Offshoring is a situation where a company decides to let a firm somewhere far away, perhaps China or India, provide it with manufacturing services or knowledge-based services. A good example is Apple Computer, headquartered in California in the United States, offshores all of its manufacturing to companies like Hon Hai and its subsidiary Foxconn in China, where Foxconn has literally 1 million employees available to assemble consumer electronics under contract manufacturing. The goals of offshoring can be multiple. Number one, to take advantage of lower wages and lower operating costs in other nations. Number two, to get some of your manufacturing or services offices close to your offshore clients. So for instance, Kraft Foods has several thousand employees offshored in China making snacks and other prepared foods for the China market. IBM, for example, has tens of thousands of employees in India in its own captive or company-owned offshore facilities. It does so because they can get lots and lots of engineers who are very focused on the IT industry at very reasonable cost and put them to work in India. It is currently becoming rather common for work to reshore. So the next term you need to know about is reshoring. And that means a company bringing back some of its manufacturing or its services work from an offshore location and bringing it back to the United States or back to Canada or back to wherever it is they're based, because they found that it simply was too difficult to negotiate the communications, the transportation gap, the cultural gap, whatever the problems were, or perhaps the quality of the product or service they were getting wasn't sufficient, or perhaps costs were running a lot higher than originally anticipated. Another trend for you to know about in this sector is called nearshoring. Now this is sort of like reshoring, but not exactly. A company in the United States, let's say, may find that the time zone changes in dealing with a manufacturing company or a services company in India or China, where the time difference can be 12 to 15 hours. The time zone differences can be so daunting, or the cultural differences or the language difference is such a problem, that many companies are now thinking more in terms of nearshoring, and that means what the word near implies, bringing their work back to perhaps lower cost countries that are much nearer to the client's home base. So companies in the United States, for instance, are in many cases nearshoring their work to Latin America, to Mexico, to Central America, where they may be able to get very, very qualified people to do the type of work they're interested in at lower costs, roughly in the same time zone as the United States, and easier to control, easier to fly to and have a visit when you need to. In many cases, nearshoring has turned into a very popular trend and a very popular sort of middle ground for this whole process. So we've talked about manufacturing being outsourced or offshored. We've talked about computer services being outsourced or offshored. Let's look at a couple of other things that are really important. And those are BPO and KPO. You'll hear these phrases a lot. BPO is business process outsourcing. So if you get on the telephone and you're calling your credit card company and you end up talking to someone who's in the Philippines or in India or some other nation while you're in the United States, that is business process outsourcing. Many companies are finding it relatively satisfactory and often a lot less expensive to send their things back office processes, business processes like bookkeeping, customer service centers, some marketing, some call centers to other nations where they can operate them at lower cost. KPO, or knowledge process outsourcing, is sending things offshore to outsourcing services companies that are a little higher up the skills chain. So things like serious accounting and tax return preparation, certain types of engineering, architectural planning. Be sure to see our Plunkett's Outsourcing and Offshoring Industry Almanac and the related center online at Plunkett Research Online. Thanks. Appreciate it.